Greetings, adventurers. How are we doing today? Okay, thank you. I wanted one person to give me a word. I appreciate that. There we go. How are we doing today? For those that have been here for 3, 4, 5 days, I have to imagine we're near the end of what is an energy-draining but incredibly fulfilling week, so thank you for sticking around and for being so attentive and having great questions and all the things. And thank you to all the other presenters today for the amazing talks and very diverse set of topics. It's been wonderful. So, today we're going to talk about threat modeling, shocker, but framed as an epic quest that blends threat modeling as a practice with team building and really immersive storytelling. Which is to say, there are a lot of fun, creative ways to bring threat modeling to developing teams. Elevation of privilege, Adam, is one great example of that. And I'm going to present a bit of a different type of way to do that incorporates one of my favorite pastimes for about 30 years, which is Dungeons and Dragons. Any Dungeons and Dragons fans here, so I know who to look at to give me a, this looks good. Okay, fantastic. All right, so let's dive in. Whether you are building a fintech portal or a microservice maze or some monolithic fortress, there are dangers and threats that lurk all around. Too often, we go into a threat modeling procedure with a dev team, and it might be somewhat difficult to get them to engage, to show interest, and to see it as something that can be a continued practice throughout their threat modeling journey. So, what I like to do is I like to bring them the idea of a campaign. How can we address this like a long-running D&D campaign? And how do we get ourselves geared up, ready to map the world and identify the monsters that lie ahead? So, just a quick aside, here's an experience bar that you're going to see to all of my RPG and D&D fans. I hope you enjoy this. And we're going to earn one experience for realizing that our team is committed to the threat modeling journey. So, now that we've begun our journey, we have to meet our party. Every good D&D campaign starts with a diverse party of combatants who are ready to jump into the adventure together and bring their own skills and class attributes to the adventure. So first, I introduce our warriors, or our developers. These are those who kind of own the code, they wield the frameworks, they're pushing the builds. They are on the front lines as both creators and as those that create risk. So they're creating these amazing products, but they're also potentially introducing risk as a facet of that. But they're not alone. They're also joined by mages, who are our architects in this D&D journey. They see the full spellbook shaping systems with abstraction and foresight. And if you want to understand where your trust boundaries are, you ask a mage. We've then got our rangers. Rangers are our testers and QA specialists. They're the bug hunters. They are the explorers, and they're the ones that keep an eye on what others may miss as they're going about their journey. They notice the what-ifs in every scenario. And no party is complete without my favorite class in D&D, and I mean this very seriously, the Bard. Yeah, I heard the snicker. Bards are our security champions. They are either direct members of the security team or those that want to shepherd and bring security to the masses via songs and dance. They carry knowledge, they sing their songs of past postmortems, and they keep everyone in the team engaged in the mission. If threat modeling is going to succeed, you need spirits high, and that's where a bard is playing their part. And to be clear, this exercise is not explicitly about any particular role within your company fitting into any particular class. It's about what people can bring to the table. It's about their experience, their skill sets, where they're interested in being a part of the threat modeling journey. And so don't feel like this is any hard-coded rule for who fits what, but it's a nice framework for who brings the right skills to the table. So together, your party has everything it needs to uncover threats, design defenses, and keep moving forward. And no class can do that alone. That is the entire point of this type of exercise. And so we're going to gain 5 experience points for defining the party's roles in our organization, And we're going to start moving our way to our first level in this campaign. So now the party is formed, what's the first thing we need to do? Well, we have to map our world. This is a bit of an inverse for those that play D&D. Typically the DM is the one mapping the world, and then the campaign party is coming in to explore. But no, in this case, the party themselves is building the map as they go. And threat modeling is no different. If you don't know how your system works, where the data flows, where the dependencies exist, you cannot defend it. So where do the dragons live? Usually by skipping ahead a slide. Where do the dragons live? Usually around the crown jewels, right? Around the big encamped castle at the top of the map. We like to call those the dragon's lair. And what about the places nobody in the team understands anymore? Or maybe a third-party service that you kind of trust but don't know a lot about? That's your dark forest. It's an area of the unexplored. By mapping the system like a world to explore, you can transform what is somewhat a rote and technical task into a tactical adventure. And better yet, you can build a shared context with your developers along the way. Everyone from devs to testers to architects can see the terrain in the same way. And even if you don't start with a fantasy map, this may be a bit, fantastical to some. You'll want to at least draw a data flow diagram. I think we all know that. That's where you start in the threat modeling journey. But whether you're drawing on a whiteboard, or you're using sticky notes, or using a great tool like Irius Risk, if you can find a way to at least storytell the world that you're building around in your threat model, then you have an opportunity to bring those into the experience. So in traditional D&D, as I said, typically players are like drawing their rooms as they go along. The DM has already crafted this very immersive campaign, and the party is building it as they go. And in threat modeling, your system kind of serves as the dungeon. And the best maps are created by the party in threat modeling, not for them. And if mapping the world was our strategic map-making phase of the process, this is the actual field work for your campaign party. Boots on the ground, a map in hand, and although mapping tools bring huge value, it's about being able to work together to make it happen. Now, where I find this process gets really fun is when you get your map started, you have the campaign team ready to move forward and start identifying the threats, but you want to ensure that they're earning some recognition along the way. I want to highlight, my background is very much in the world of security champion programs, and in the idea of a security champion, you are kind of adding some gamification to the experience for developers. They are completing good security tasks, they're earning credit and rewards along the way. I look at this idea as the same type of process. You're going to recognize your threat modeling campaign team for identifying these different facets on the map. They could earn, 1 XP for contributing to a boundary. They could earn 2 XP for proposing a what-if threat scenario. They could earn 5 XP for identifying some unknown component that was missed in prior threat modeling exercises. The key here is you can define the reward mechanism however you want, but for those that are engaged in this type of campaign, especially if they're D&D fans like myself, if they know that there are tied rewards to all of these activities, it's really bringing them into an experience that they see progress in. They're not just performing the task, they're earning credit as a byproduct of that work. And in doing so, they then need to start revealing the monsters or identifying the threats across that system. This is an actual example that was used with an organization I worked with about a year ago, trying out this process for the first time. It was a little wonky, but we got there. And what was fun about this is we got to start to think about, you have these classic D&D monsters that exist. How can we start mapping those, in particular to the Stride model, to these different types of threats that can exist in your ecosystem? So in this case, we assembled our party, we mapped our world, and now we're standing at the edge of the dark forest and saying, what's here? And we started by identifying, well, there was a troll of privilege. that existed, right? And so this was an example of EOP, and so we gave that warrior 5 experience points for making that identification. And then we went on and saw there was a ghost in the logs, and then there was a bugbear of tampering across the way. What we understand here is that they're utilizing a tried and true method like Stride to do the hard work, but we're adding some fun and flair to the process. So they're seeing, we had these printed battle cards of these different types of threats. They were all represented by monsters. And as a tabletop exercise, it was kind of a fun way to see, feel, touch what these things were in a way that brought you into a creative experience, not just filling out different risks on a spreadsheet or in some threat modeling tool. So after we identified the threats, what was necessary was to then identify what are our mitigations, right? So the monsters are revealed, and now it's time for the party to suit up, identify the spells they need, what different weapons or shields they need to bring on their journey, and then identify how to win the battle. So in threat modeling, mitigation isn't just plugging holes, it's using the right tools for the right beast. And so you would see the same thing in D&D. Let's say you uncovered a ghost in the logs, and your mitigation might be a log redaction or some structured error handling, whatever it might be. Maybe you found a troll of privilege and you need to bring out RBAC as maybe some type of audit logging or something as a shield against that. The key is every one of these threats has a mitigation that can be identified, and again, if you kind of really lean into the theme, you can start building out these different tools and armors that allow you to address these threats along the way. And of course, you can then give experience to your party for identifying these different mitigation methods. And in this case, what we were doing was giving 5 XP for every effective mitigation that they proposed, and a bonus 2 XP for what I would call a layered defense or a combo attack. So the metaphor is again, I think if you're a fan of D&D, the metaphor lands. Maybe if not, it's kind of like, okay, this is interesting, but what's in it for us? Like, how does this really work? Well, I think developers can sometimes groan at the phrase implement mitigations, but they'll learn that when they're asked what spell to use or what sword or axe to bring to slay a vampire from draining user tokens, there might be a little bit more interest in going through the process. Now, it's not for everyone, but here's the thing. Not all weapons are equal. So the key here, again, with the experience is maybe they will find other ways to be rewarded other than experience. Maybe you give a badge to one of your warriors because they identified a very high-risk threat and developed a very strong mitigation technique. What I'm trying to say is you can come up with 1,000 different ways to paint this for the party. The key is to just keep building on that experience. So that's kind of how the campaign would run, and I want to call out that, just like we've heard about threat modeling in almost every talk today, it's not a one-time effort. You start the campaign the first time, you introduce your party to this D&D-like process, but you want it to be a long-term campaign. Just like any Dungeons & Dragons campaign, it's something you come back to over weeks and weeks and months, and it lives on as this iterative journey. So just like that long-term campaign, players would check in every session. They would reassess the map, kind of recount what monsters they've already encountered. Are there new ones or there's new gear that we need to put on in order to address these threats? And why wouldn't we do the same thing with threat modeling? So battle plans and stand-ups are where threat modeling is kind of baked into your SDLC rhythm. Not like a special event that happens once and we're done, okay, we had the D&D thing, let's move on to our day job. No, how can we maybe build this into every month or every sprint or maybe at worst once a quarter? Let's revisit the campaign in a cadence and build long-term buy-in into the process. So you can revisit the map, you can start assigning a rotating threat leader. That bard doesn't necessarily have to be your AppSec engineer or security champion. Maybe there's a developer who's just interested in leading the party. They want experience kind of being that shepherd or being that facilitator. And guess what? Great way to get them more ingrained in security practice, right? You start building allies across the org when you start sharing different responsibilities in this adventure. And using prompts like what changed, what new features have been introduced, was there a recent new integration or third-party dependency brought in? It just allows them to continue recreating this scenario in their brains, this campaign, and thinking about new ways to address the threat model itself. One last thing I'll call out too is making progress visible for this was critical in the times that we've done it. Again, similar to the security champion program, it's one thing to recognize somebody in the moment, but creating some type of public way for them to be recognized for that effort is key. And I'm going to speak about that in a bit more detail in just a second. So again, we're going to take 5 XP for taking on the DM role as a non-security person, and we're going to get pretty darn close to level 2. But before we get to level 2, I want to again talk about keeping the quest alive, because for me, this is the most important part. I love Dungeons & Dragons. I can sit here and talk about ways to implement that in like everything in life, because that's just where I come from. But the reality is, I'm using it as a vehicle to get developers engaged in something that they might otherwise not want to spend their time on. It doesn't work for everybody. Again, you could find other analogies for this, but if you've ever played a long-running D&D campaign, you know that the best group can still burn out without having some variety to it. And so the same goes to this type of a threat modeling practice. So the first thing I want to highlight is recognizing their proactive behavior, their willingness to engage in this type of a campaign is critical. Them knowing that they're going to get a public shout out in Slack or Teams, maybe badges or a team leaderboard that you could post in like Power BI or pick your tool of choice. Just something that they're going to see in their company intranet that says, oh, I was a part of this, I'm being recognized for it, and my peers may see it too and say, hey, what was this D&D threat modeling campaign you were part of? It's an opportunity to bring more in. As I mentioned earlier, finding a way to rotate the roles and avoid the fatigue of the process is critical as well. And use creative formats. Again, you don't necessarily have to make it a pure D&D campaign. You could do some type of red team challenge, or just build like a single one-time tabletop scenario with like one particular app or service that you want to investigate. Or maybe even like a monster of the month, almost like similar to like a bug bounty or something. Like I want to really target this one threat. And again, encouraging leveling up. This again works really well if you already have some type of existing champion or champion adjacent program where maybe the efforts that are expounded here could directly relate to how they progress in the overall security program itself. But offering those rewards for earning experience is great too if you have the budget. At the very least, find a way to recognize them so that everybody else that they work with, their peers, knows, hey, they were part of something special. And as a fast of that, we're going to get really darn close to our last level. But before we do, just talking about returning home victorious, or as I like to say, the summary of this talk. Like all good adventurers, our quest has come to a close, but really this is just the beginning if you want to take this on. Threat modeling can be anything you want it to be. It can be a tabletop exercise, it can be a game of EOP, it could be a D&D adventure. It could just be something where you bring folks in, and whether it's remote or in person, you're finding a way to engage and make it something that people want to be a part of. But the key for me, no matter which type of engagement model you want to choose, is ensure that it's a shared adventure. Make sure that everyone feels like they are a part of it, they have a voice, they're being recognized for taking their time and energy to do it, because we all know the long-term benefits of making that investment in time. And so whether you choose to use this very, very deep analogy or not, find a way to map the system, recognize them for doing so, and come back to redraw that map over and over again. And I'll just highlight at the very end, one, we've leveled up and you've taken it this far on the journey with me, so thank you for that. And two, if you would all be interested, I did create a Google Drive folder with a handful of artifacts. If you're interested in trying this out, they're very lightweight, it's nothing crazy, but it's a handful of different types of artifacts where you have these character cards that you can print out, or just give to them in a PDF, a monster manual that is interesting to say the least. Feel free to rip that apart or add different monsters to it. And an example session script. For anybody that's been a DM, I think you would empathize. It helps a lot to have a short script that allows you to get the campaign going. So I put together a very short form script to at least get you started in introducing this to your party. And if you want to talk more about this, if you want to bring this into your org, if you'd like to have like a one-time DM, kind of kick it off, send me a message on LinkedIn. I would be happy to do this a million times, just to see it in action and to get more feedback. And with that, I thank you all very much for the time, and I ask you to share your ethics as well. I don't know what kind of questions we'll get, but let's do it.
First of all, thank you very much for a great talk. I'm a big D&D fan, so it was very entertaining for me. My question is actually, what's your experience on running this with people that are extremely technical and usually it's IT tools for the new ideas like emerging in such an entertainment industry, they are very kind of avoiding these kind of things in my corporate, for example. Do you have this kind of experience with people and how you overcome it? Or how many sessions do you run usually?
So the first time I did this, we did a lot of planning ahead of time to ensure that the first party that we built were already D&D fans. It made it a lot easier to introduce it as a very kind of novel and somewhat out of this world way to implement the process, but what it allowed us to do is to get initial buy-in with a group of about 6 devs and a couple of QAs. Once we went through 2 iterations with that group, like it wasn't difficult for them to buy in. They were like, this is great, it's like kind of this adjacent way to engage in a campaign, like we will absolutely buy into it. But once we started to publish the results on SharePoint, and some of their peers, other security champions, saw this thing and they were just curious what it was about, they were willing to kind of let their guard down and just experience it. Now I will say, in the 3rd or 4th iteration, those new devs that came in were very quiet at the start. They didn't know how to engage. But what was nice was seeing their peers start to prompt them, or at the very least say, hey Joe, you might have a really good thought here in terms of mitigation, do you mind chiming in? And then once they saw they were earning credit for those, and again, like this was a virtual session, so we were keeping a lot of the notes going on in the chat in Teams. When they started to see that, hey, Joe just earned 5 experience for this thing, then these other newbies started getting more and more comfortable just speaking up. So it is a bit of a groundswell that you have to build. My recommendation is always like literally ask who likes D&D and wants to try something crazy. And then you'll see that some buy-in starts, some snowball effects start to take place after a few iterations. All right, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
So we're a little